Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
And I'm Ian.
Today we're talking about a great album from way back in, 1967? The debut album from The Doors. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So the Doors' debut album was released on January 4th, 1967. It was famously recorded over a 1 week time in, I think it was the end of August into September 1966. But it was a groundbreaking album. It was a fusion of so many other things that was going on in rock music at that time. Obviously, rock was very experimental by the late part of the 60s, and the Doors took some of that, and they kind of blended it in with this soul sound,
soul psychedelic.
Yes, it was kind of all mixed in, and it was a different album than what their contemporaries were doing in 1967.
I would even say there's some proto prog in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Before it was even but even in some of the instrumentation, a lot of that stuff would be taken and expanded upon by progressive rock bands that would come after the fact. Yeah. But early days, I wouldn't say this is a prog album, but I think there's definitely some proto prog elements there.
Yeah. Of course, the album is known for some of the biggest tracks of its era. "Light My Fire" was a huge song, But the thing, what makes this album so great is the fact that it's the other tracks on there. It's the 20th Century Fox songs on there. It's the songs that don't get all the notoriety as some of those other ones that I think kind of make the album what it really is.
I agree. There isn't a bad track on this album. No. A lot of them have become, even maybe not so much when they were released, but have become staples of classic rock and oldies radio stations in recent years and even recent decades.
Yeah.
It's just I would consider this a front to back perfect album.
Oh, absolutely! It's a 10 out of 10 album for sure. One of the things that the Doors did on this album, and something that I can't think of another band in 1966, 1967 that was really popular in the mainstream that was doing this. They didn't have a bass player. There was no bass in it. It was all Ray Manzarek, really,
and drums and the bass from the drums.
Well, but it was more so the keyboard playing of Ray Manzarek that replaced the typical standard bass that you'd hear in a song. And I can't think of another band that was doing that like that. That's why I said this is a very groundbreaking album. The stuff that the Doors did, they had a very short career, but what they would do, especially earlier in their career, I think really changed rock music in that era. So I've been listening to this album since I was probably 12 13 years old.
Maybe even younger, because all those radio tracks I remember hearing when I was even younger than that. Because Detroit got its first classic rock radio station I think in '87, and obviously "Light My Fire" and all that was big radio play. Although it was the edited version where the keyboard solo is cut out, which is in my opinion blasphemy, but that's just me.
But I listened to this album for so long and didn't even know that two of the songs on here are covers.
I didn't know
Can you guess the two covers that are on there?
Let me see it.
Well, if you look at it, you'll know because it's got different author's name on there. Alabama Song.
I was actually thinking that, but I wouldn't want to say it without. I don't know.
And Backdoor Man. The band didn't write either one of those songs.
Okay. Alabama Song, I suspected.
Yeah, and those are two of the better songs on the album.
Oh, I love Alabama Song. I love them all, but yeah.
Something I don't think this album gets nearly enough credit for is Robbie Kger's guitar playing on this album. The way he infused blues into his guitar playing, I think really kind of set the stage for some of those blues rock bands in the early part of the 70s. It was something that, yes, there were other bands that were doing that kind of style of guitar, but I think he took it to a different level, even though he's not the greatest guitar player, but what he was able to do with his talents really kind of formed part of the backbone of this album and really the band.
Right. And "Light My Fire," which is their biggest hit, he wrote it, didn't he?
I believe so.
Even the lyrics. I know he wrote the lyrics, but I think he wrote the music too. I should say he co-wrote the lyrics. He wrote the lyrics and Jim Morrison tweaked them.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I could be remembering it from the movie too. I don't know how accurate that is.
The movie is not accurate at all.
In the movie, he wrote the lyrics.
Yeah, I think Jim wrote pretty much everything on this album, though.
Lyrically?
Yeah. And kind of going to what you were saying earlier, the Prague Elements, I attribute that to the song The End, which is like the big centerpiece of the album, I think. Right. Yes, you had Light My Fire and Break On Through, those kind of songs that got really popular, but The End has always been one of my favorite songs by the band, especially, it's got that whole Oedipus complex thing in the middle of the song, which, was sung a little differently live than what they did on the album, but they couldn't really record the album like that back in the late 60s.
Release it without it being heavily challenged.
Yeah.
For me, when I say Prague Elements, that for sure, because it's a longer form song.
It's not just the long form of it.
But that adds
the structuring of that
the structure,
song.
the length. But like I said, there's elements of it even in other songs. The keyboard solo in Light My Fire is a perfect example of that proto-prog element to it. And the incorporation of multiple different genres and styles into this music, which, like you said, hadn't been done to that level before. Those are all staples of progressive rock music. And this was being done before progressive rock music was even a thing.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't even say. Some people argue that the first Prague album was Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I don't agree. Yeah. I don't agree. Other people say it was
more psychedelic than anything.
Other people say it was Days of Future Past by Moody Blues, which came out the same year as this. I also disagree, but there's proto elements there as well.
Yeah.
But you're talking about a subgenre that did not exist.
At least on a large scale.
Right. Well, even in the consciousness, no one would have looked at this in 1968 and said, "Oh, that's a proto-prog album. That's this new thing. Let's call it prog." No one would have done that. You didn't get prog until
that label didn't exist
until like 71, 72 is when that started to become a thing.
Yeah.
And these all predated it. So I would argue that this is more proto-prog than definitely Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and more proto-prog than even Days of Future Past by Moody Blues, which it is there in Days of Future Past, but there's more of it there, more of it here.
I guess the one thing I can knock the album on, that's probably the only thing I can really think of, is John Densmore is not a great drummer. And I in a lot of ways, I feel like his style fit this music, but I also think to myself, had they had a more accomplished drummer, could he have even risen those songs up even better than what they are?
Possibly. And like we talked a little off camera. Like when I said drums was in place of bass, I wasn't saying the drums replaced the bass. That's where some of the depth came from.
Yeah.
It was, Ray Van Zerk was doing the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
But the drums were there too, kind of lifting up that just the deeper tones of the music. Honestly, I don't know if I've ever really given his drumming skills a thought.
Yeah. I feel like they got better on later albums.
Right. But there's not that many albums to go by.
Yeah.
I mean, they 5?
Yeah, 6.
6 albums?
Yeah.
Which is a lot in 4 years. But still, it'd be interesting to see how he might have been remembered if the Doors had continued on like the Stones.
Yeah.
Or, even the Beatles. They could have gone another 5 or 6 years and then broken up.
Yeah.
What the quality of his drumming might have been. Especially if you take a band like them, who once those prog bands were coming out and rock music was changing, they would have changed their style just as much. And who knows what could have, the masterpieces that could have been. Also the garbage that could have been.
Yeah,
too.
it would have been interesting to see what the band could have done had Jim lived.
Right. The thing is, though, we say that Jim was done with the band before he died, at least for a while. Would he have come back to it? Maybe. Probably when the money ran out. But I think he was done with it.
Yeah.
Again, my memory of that could be from the film. And as we've pointed out, that's
Don't base anything on the Doors.
But
whenever there's an Oliver Stone movie, take everything involved in the movie with a grain of salt, because Oliver Stone likes
I don't know. His
to
Conan the
exaggerate.
Barbarian was pretty accurate. No, it's just that I've been with the Doors film almost as long as I've been with Doors music.
Yeah.
In fact, I probably wouldn't even like the Doors if it weren't for that movie coming out. That movie came out in 91.
Yeah, something like that.
So I was 13. I was just coming into the point of like establishing my own musical taste. Yeah. And that movie helped to move me into the Doors a little bit. If it hadn't been for the movie, I might not have done it, or at least not done it when I did.
Yeah.
So it's easy for me for that movie to cloud my knowledge of the band, because I'm going to always connect to that movie.
I guess kind of going back to John's drumming for a second, there is a simplistic sophistication to his playing style. I think it's very like jazz influenced, and maybe that's why it comes off at times as being more
minus
simplified.
The improvisation.
Yes.
Maybe that's where it feels a little weak.
Yeah, maybe.
So jazz drummers are hugely improvisational.
Sometimes, yes. Yeah.
I feel they are.
This album is also a great album that is capturing kind of the chaos
of the time
of the late 60s. And it comes through on this album in ways that it took me a really long time to really understand that. And I think as I've gotten older, I'm able to kind of connect more of those lines from what some of the meaning is in some of these songs to some of the stuff that was going on in the U.S. in the 60s.
Yeah, I agree with that.
One thing that really does come through on this album, so a band that's been together for a very short period of time, the chemistry that they have on this album is another thing that I feel like a lot of other bands that had only been around for a short period of time really didn't have in the 60s. It sounds like this doesn't necessarily sound like a debut album. It sounds like it could be a second, third, fourth album from a band.
Right. I agree with that. And I have a feeling that that's probably why the Doors didn't really ever replace Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
Because
that you really couldn't.
You couldn't. But they could have replaced him. And maybe not been as good or as popular, but they could have gone on. What I'm saying is that when you have that kind of natural chemistry, that natural unification of three or four
it's hard
people,
to repeat that.
And it's just, you're not, it's the same reason Queen has never recorded with anyone other than Freddie.
Yeah.
They sound great with Adam Lambert when they do the performances on stage, but those are performances. They've never replaced Freddie in the studio.
Yeah, because
for the same reason.
Frontmen like that, you just can't replace them.
But I have a feeling that Adam Lambert probably could not live completely up to Freddie, but they could do a new Queen album with Adam Lambert and be fine.
Yeah.
But that spark, that chemistry, I get it. It makes perfect sense. Some bands can do it, some bands can't.
Yeah. So as far as like my favorite songs off this album, I already said The End. It's probably, I think that is my favorite song off here. Obviously, you can't go wrong with Light My Fire. Break On Through is another great one. Soul Kitchen, I think, is a very underrated song.
Honestly, Soul Kitchen is probably one I go back to the most.
Yeah. And, obviously, to be honest, I probably could just, throw a dart and pick any song off this album and say it's a favorite track, because there's nothing skippable on here. Right. And the funny thing is, like, as much as this album has been talked about over the years, like off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone that's ever had like a real negative comment about this album.
Well, I'm
stretching to find anything.
I jokingly told Nick, I said, this is going to be a short episode because I have nothing negative to say about this album.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to try to find something.
Right. Soul Kitchen, if I have to pick if gun to my head, favorite song, Soul Kitchen would be it for me.
Scale 1 to 10?
10.
It's a 10 out of 10.
There's no question.
Yeah. This is one of those albums that's something I try to stay away from, saying you need to have this album in your collection. This is an album that you have to have in your collection. Like it's one of those quintessential albums that, regardless of what genre of music you listen to, I think everyone's going to like this album.
I agree.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Love to know what you guys think of this album. I'm sure you've listened to it before. Do you own copies of it? I've had multiple copies. This is one of those albums where I had an original pressing of it. It might not have been an original pressing. It might have been like a 68 pressing of it. It was like early pressing. Right. I bought a reissue of it probably like 6 or 8 years ago also. And I think it probably had like at least 2 or 3 copies of it. And then I bought this Analog Productions copy. And I mean, once you listen to that version of it, I was like, I'm never going to listen to these other ones. So I ended up selling them. But, it's one of those albums, like I said, you've got to listen to. You got to have it in your collection. But let me know how you guys would rank it from 1 to 10.
Just if you have constructive criticisms of the album, I'd like to hear
Yeah,
them,
absolutely.
because we just gushed over it. We couldn't think of anything negative short of, some little minor things.
Yeah.
If you've got real criticisms of the album, I would like to know, because that would be interesting to maybe approach the album from a different perspective.
But let us know how you guys would rank that album. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you see a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.